Have you ever experienced something unexplainable in the woods? A ghostly figure, an eerie sound, or a feeling of being watched? We've shared our terrifying encounters, but now it's your turn. Leave a comment below describing your scariest forest experience. The most chilling story will be featured in our next video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to join our community of horror enthusiasts. Remember, the forest holds many secrets, and not all of them want to stay hidden. Share your story if you dare. The Phantom of Widow's Peak. I've been a logger for over a decade, and I've always prided myself on being a rational man. Ghosts, spirits, the supernatural, that was all nonsense to me. Or at least, it was until last winter at Widow's Peak. Widow's Peak logging camp was nestled high in the mountains, a small clearing surrounded by towering pines and deep ravines. The camp got its name from a tragic accident back in the 1950s. A whole crew of loggers had been wiped out in a freak landslide. The sole survivor was the foreman's wife, who watched helplessly as her husband and his men were swallowed by the mountain. We all knew the story, of course. It was part of logging lore, but none of us took it seriously. We were there to do a job, not get spooked by old tales. The first few weeks were uneventful, hard work during the day, relaxing around the campfire at night. But as winter set in and the days grew shorter, things began to change. It started with whispers. Guys claiming they'd seen something out in the woods. A figure, they said, dressed in old-fashioned logging gear. Always at the edge of vision, always gone when you turned to look properly. I dismissed it all, of course. The mind plays tricks in the forest, especially in the dim light of dawn or dusk. But then I saw him myself. It was early morning, just before sunrise. I was heading out to my section when I saw him. A man standing at the edge of the clearing. He was dressed in logging gear that looked straight out of the 1950s. But it was his face that stopped me cold. Pale, almost glowing in the pre-dawn light, with eyes that seemed to bore right through me. He raised his hand, pointing urgently at something behind me. I spun around, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. When I looked back, he was gone. I tried to shake it off. Told myself it was just lack of sleep, maybe the altitude playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen was real. The sightings increased after that. Other loggers reported similar experiences. Always the same figure, always pointing or gesturing as if trying to warn us of something. Then the accidents started. First, it was minor things. Equipment malfunctioning, trees falling in unexpected directions. But it quickly escalated. One of our guys, Mike, nearly got crushed when his chainsaw kicked back unexpectedly. He swore he'd seen the ghostly logger moments before, pointing at his saw. I still tried to rationalize it all. Coincidences, I told myself. Just a string of bad luck. But doubt was creeping in, eroding my certainty. The turning point came about a month into the job. We were working a new section, right on the edge of a steep ravine. As I was marking trees, I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned, and there he was. The ghostly logger, more solid and real-looking than I'd ever seen him. He was pointing urgently at the ground, his face a mask of desperation. Then, to my horror, he began to sink into the earth, his mouth open in a silent scream. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding. That's when I heard it, a low rumble, growing louder by the second. The ground beneath my feet began to tremble. "Landslide!" I screamed, running towards my crew. "Everyone, run!" We barely made it. The entire section we'd been working collapsed into the ravine, taking trees, equipment, and very nearly us with it. As we stood there, panting and shaken, watching the dust settle, I knew I could no longer deny what was happening. The ghost was real, and he was trying to warn us. From that day on, everything changed. We became hyper-vigilant, always on the lookout for our spectral warning system. Some of the crew left, too spooked to continue. Those of us who stayed formed an uneasy alliance with our ghostly protector. But the accidents kept coming. It was as if the mountain itself was trying to drive us away. Equipment would fail at crucial moments. Trees would fall against all logic and experience. And always, just before disaster struck, there would be a sighting of our ghostly logger. We started to piece together the pattern. The ghost always appeared before an accident or near miss. He was trying to warn us to prevent history from repeating itself. As winter deepened, the tension in the camp became unbearable. We were jumping at shadows, seeing the ghost everywhere. Sleep became a luxury none of us could afford. We knew that a moment's inattention could mean death. It all came to a head on a bitterly cold day in late January. We were working despite a heavy snowfall, trying to meet our quota. Visibility was poor, the wind howling through the trees. I was operating the skidder when I saw him, the ghost standing right in my path. He was more substantial than I'd ever seen him, his eyes filled with a terrible urgency. He pointed behind me, his mouth open in a silent scream. I slammed on the brakes and turned. Through the swirling snow, I saw a massive pine starting to fall, right towards our crew. "Look out!" I screamed, but my voice was lost in the wind. What happened next? I still can't explain. The ghost seemed to blur, to multiply. Suddenly there were dozens of spectral loggers, all pushing against the falling tree. To my astonishment, the tree's fall slowed, then stopped, held up by invisible hands. The crew scattered, finally noticing their brush with death. As the last man cleared the danger zone, the ghostly loggers vanished. The tree crashed down with a thunderous roar. In the stunned silence that followed, I saw our ghost one last time. He stood at the edge of the clearing, sad smile on his face. He gave me a nod, then faded away. Somehow, I knew we wouldn't see him again. We shut down the operation after that. Some things are more important than meeting quotas. As we drove down the mountain for the last time, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd been part of something much bigger than ourselves. The official report cited dangerous conditions and equipment malfunctions as the reason for the shutdown. They didn't believe our stories of a ghostly logger saving our lives. Maybe that's for the best. But I know what I saw, what we all saw. And I know that up on Widow's Peak there's a spirit still watching over the forest and those who work in it. I don't log anymore. Can't bring myself to pick up a chainsaw or walk among those towering pines. But sometimes, on cold winter nights, when the wind howls outside my window, I swear I can hear the distant echo of a warning call. And I wonder about the ghostly logger of Widow's Peak, still standing guard after all these years. So if you ever find yourself in those mountains and you see a figure in old-fashioned logging gear at the edge of your vision, pay attention. He might just be trying to save your life. Because in the deep forests and high mountains, where the veil between worlds grows thin, there are those who linger, those who remain to protect the living from fates they themselves couldn't escape. And sometimes, just sometimes, they succeed. As for me, I'm still here, still remembering. Every creaking floorboard, every shadow in the corner of my eye makes me wonder, is he here? Has he followed me down from the mountain? Part of me hopes he has. Because as terrifying as those weeks on Widow's Peak were, they taught me something important. That there are forces in this world beyond our understanding. Forces that, sometimes, are on our side. So tonight, as the wind howls and the shadows deepen, I'll raise a glass to the ghostly logger of Widow's Peak. And I'll whisper a quiet thank you to the spirit who saved us all. Because in the end, that's all any of us can do. Acknowledge the mystery, respect the unknown, and be grateful for the guardians we cannot see, but who watch over us all the same. Sleep well, my spectral friend, and know that your warning will never be forgotten. The static speaks. I never believed in the supernatural. As the radio operator for Pinewood Logging Camp, I dealt in facts, in clear signals, and precise coordinates. But what happened last summer, it shook my beliefs to the core. My name is Rachel, and this is my story. Pinewood was as isolated as they come. Nestled deep in the Cascade Mountains, our camp was home to 30 loggers for 6 months of the year. My job was simple: maintain communication with the outside world. One radio, one satellite phone for emergencies. That was our lifeline. At first, everything was routine. Daily check-ins, weather reports, occasional personal messages for the crew. The isolation didn't bother me. I'd always been a loner, more comfortable with equipment than people. It started on a Tuesday night, about a month into the season. I was doing a final check before turning in when I heard it. A burst of static, then a voice. Faint, distorted, but unmistakably there. Blood on the leaves. I adjusted the dials, trying to clear the signal, but it was gone. Just empty static. I logged it as interference and went to bed. The next night it happened again. This time the voice was clearer. The trees weep red tears. It was unsettling, but I rationalized it. Probably some poetic logger on another frequency. I didn't mention it to anyone, but it kept happening. Every night, always after midnight. The messages grew longer, more coherent, and more disturbing. The forest hungers. It will feed soon. I started dreading my night shifts. The logical part of my brain insisted it was just a prank, maybe someone from a nearby camp messing with us. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. There was something off about those broadcasts. The voice seemed to shift, sometimes sounding male, sometimes female. Sometimes it wasn't even a voice at all, just a rhythmic tapping that made my skin crawl. A week after the broadcast started, we had our first accident. Jim, one of our veteran loggers, was badly injured when a tree fell the wrong way. As they carried him into camp, I felt a chill run down my spine. The night before, the radio had crackled. Tomorrow the giant will fall. Blood will soak the moss. I tried to tell myself it was a coincidence. Trees fell all the time in logging. Accidents happened, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The broadcasts continued, growing more frequent and more specific. They began to hint at things no stranger could know. Personal details about crew members, old secrets, future plans. Mark dreams of leaving. He won't make it past the ridge. 2 days later, Mark vanished during a supply run to town. His truck was found abandoned near the ridge that led down the mountain. No sign of Mark. I finally told our camp manager Dave about the broadcasts. He was skeptical but agreed to listen in with me that night. We sat in tense silence as the hour approached. Static. Then that voice, cold and clear. The non-believer listens. Now he will see. Dave's face went pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, the lights flickered. The radio erupted in a burst of noise so loud we both jumped back. When it cleared, a new sound filled the room. Screaming. Distant, agonized screaming. We ran outside. The screams were coming from the direction of the mess hall. We found the cook writhing on the floor, his hands pressed to his eyes. When we pried them away, his eye sockets were empty. Smooth skin where his eyes should have been. The camp descended into chaos after that. Some men left immediately, despite the dangerous night drive down the mountain. Others barricaded themselves in their cabins. A few, led by Dave, decided to hunt for the source of the broadcasts, convinced it was an elaborate hoax. I stayed by my radio. I don't know why. Fear, curiosity, a sense of duty, maybe all of them. As the night wore on, the broadcast became a constant stream of whispers, screams, and inhuman sounds. Then suddenly, silence, followed by a single, chilling message. "Rachel, come outside, see what we have brought you." My heart pounded as I approached the door. Every instinct screamed at me to stay inside, to hide, but something pulled me forward. I opened the door. The forest was alive with light. Thousands of tiny, glowing orbs floated among the trees. They pulsed in rhythm, like a heartbeat, like the static from the radio. In the center of the clearing stood a figure. Tall, impossibly thin, its skin seemed to shift and ripple like static on a TV screen. Where its face should have been, there was only a speaker, crackling with that now familiar static. I wanted to run, to scream, but I was frozen in place. The figure raised a hand, beckoning. "Rachel," it said, its voice a chorus of all the voices I'd heard on the radio. "We've been waiting for you." I took a step forward, my body moving against my will. The glowing orbs swarmed around me, their light growing brighter, brighter. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed. They told me I was the only survivor. The rescue team found me unconscious at my radio, the equipment fried by some massive power surge. The rest of the camp was empty. No bodies, no signs of struggle. 30 men, vanished without a trace. They've questioned me countless times about the radio, the broadcasts, the lights in the forest. I've told them everything, but I can see the doubt in their eyes. They think I'm crazy, or worse, somehow responsible. Sometimes I wonder if they're right. if it was all just a hallucination brought on by isolation and stress. But then I'll catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, like static given form. Or I'll wake up in the middle of the night, my room filled with a faint, pulsing glow that vanishes when I blink. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I swear I can hear it. That static, that voice, coming from my unplugged radio, my turned-off TV, my silent phone. Rachel, we're still waiting. I don't know what happened at Pinewood. I don't know what those things were, or what they wanted. All I know is that it's not over. Whatever came through that radio, whatever took those men, it's still out there, watching, waiting, and I can't shake the feeling that one day it will call again. One final broadcast, and this time I won't be able to resist answering. So if you're out in the woods and you hear a strange broadcast on your radio, don't listen, don't answer, just run. Run as far and as fast as you can, because once the static speaks to you, it never truly goes silent again. The vanishing at Blackwood Ridge. I've been in the logging business for over 15 years, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened at Blackwood Ridge. My name is Alex, and I was the camp leader for a crew of 12 men. We were contracted for a 3-month job in one of the most remote parts of the Pacific Northwest. Little did I know, those would be the longest and most terrifying months of my life. Blackwood Ridge was as isolated as it gets. The nearest town was a 4-hour drive down a winding mountain road, and cell service was non-existent. Our camp was set up near an old, abandoned gold mine, a relic from the 1800s that the locals said was cursed. We laughed it off at first. Superstitions were for kids and tourists, not hardened loggers like us. The first few weeks were uneventful. We fell into a routine. Up at dawn, work till dusk, then gather around the campfire for dinner and drinks. The work was hard, but the men were in good spirits. That all changed the night Tom disappeared. It was a Tuesday, I remember clearly. We'd finished dinner and most of the crew had turned in for the night. Tom said he was going to use the outhouse before bed. When he didn't return after 20 minutes, I figured he'd gone straight to his tent. It wasn't until morning roll call that we realized he was gone. We searched for hours, combed every inch of the surrounding forest, but there was no trace of Tom, no footprints leading away from camp, no signs of a struggle. It was as if he'd simply vanished into thin air. The men were unsettled, but we had a job to do. We radioed for the police, but they couldn't get up to us for at least a day due to the remote location. So we kept working, albeit with a heightened sense of caution. 3 days later, it happened again. This time, it was Mike, one of our youngest crew members. He went to get some tools from the supply shed and never came back. Again, no traces, no clues, just gone. That's when the fear really set in. The men started talking about the curse of the old mine. Some wanted to leave immediately, contract be damned, but I convinced them to stay. We needed this job, and I was sure there had to be a logical explanation. I set up a buddy system. No one was to go anywhere alone, not even to the bathroom. We kept floodlights on all night, illuminating the camp and the edge of the forest. I even organized night watches, with 2 men staying awake at all times. For a week, it seemed to work. No more disappearances. We started to relax, thinking maybe whatever had happened was over. We couldn't have been more wrong. It was during my night watch that I first heard it. A low, humming sound coming from the direction of the old mine. It was barely audible at first, but it grew louder as the night wore on. By dawn, it was clear that everyone had heard it. The sound had wormed its way into our dreams, leaving us all on edge. That day, 3 men vanished. One moment they were cutting timber, their chainsaws roaring. The next, silence. When their work partners turned around, they were simply gone. No screams, no struggle, just empty space where a person should have been. Panic set in. Half the remaining crew took off in one of our trucks, desperate to get away. I wanted to stop them, to keep us all together, but I couldn't blame them for running. Those of us who stayed behind barricaded ourselves in the main cabin. We pushed furniture against the doors and windows, though deep down we knew it was useless against whatever was out there. The humming from the mine grew louder, now accompanied by a rhythmic thumping, like a massive heartbeat. As night fell, the sounds intensified. The walls of the cabin seemed to vibrate with each pulse. We huddled together, wide-eyed and trembling. None of us slept. We just waited, listening to that terrible rhythm, wondering if we'd be next. Sometime after midnight, the lights went out. In the pitch darkness, I heard one of the men, I think it was Dave, whisper, "Do you smell that?" A musty, earthy scent filled the air, like freshly turned soil mixed with something metallic. The temperature dropped suddenly, our breath visible in the beam of our flashlights. That's when we saw them. Shadows, darker than the darkness around us, moving against the walls. They had no definite shape, constantly shifting and flowing. But somehow, they gave the impression of reaching, grasping. A scream pierced the air. In the chaos that followed, I'm not sure what exactly happened. Flashlight beams darted wildly around the room. I caught glimpses of my men being enveloped by those living shadows, their screams cut off abruptly as they vanished, leaving nothing behind. I'd like to say I fought bravely, that I tried to save my men. But the truth is, I ran. I burst out of the cabin and ran blindly into the forest. The humming and thumping were deafening now, seeming to come from everywhere at once. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I don't know how long I lay there on the forest floor, gasping for breath, waiting for those shadows to take me too. But they never came. As dawn broke, the sounds faded. The oppressive atmosphere lifted. I found myself alone in a quiet forest, with no sign of the terror that had unfolded during the night. When I finally made it back to the camp, it was deserted. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just empty tents and abandoned equipment. Even the men who had fled in the truck were gone. Their vehicle was found at the bottom of a ravine off the mountain road, but there were no bodies inside or nearby. The authorities conducted a thorough investigation, of course. They searched the mine, the forest, every inch of that mountain. But they found nothing. No traces of my crew, no explanation for what had happened. Eventually, they chalked it up to a series of unfortunate accidents and animal attacks. They said my story of living shadows and vanishing men was a result of stress and trauma. Maybe they're right. Maybe I did imagine it all. God knows I've spent countless sleepless nights wondering if I've gone mad. But then I'll catch a glimpse of a shadow moving strangely out of the corner of my eye. Or I'll wake up in a cold sweat, that earthy metallic smell lingering in my nostrils. And sometimes in the dead of night, I swear I can hear it. That low hum, that rhythmic thumping, calling me back to Blackwood Ridge. I've tried to move on, to forget. I left the logging business, moved to the city, surrounded myself with people and noise and light, but I know it's not over. Whatever happened at Blackwood Ridge, whatever took my men, it's still out there, waiting, watching. And I can't shake the feeling that one day it will come for me too. That one night I'll blink, and when I open my eyes, I'll be back in those woods. Back in that cabin with the shadows closing in, so I keep the lights on, I avoid dark spaces and lonely roads. And I warn anyone who will listen, if you ever find yourself near Blackwood Ridge, near that old mine, run. Run as fast and as far as you can, because some things are better left undisturbed. Some mysteries should remain unsolved. But if you do go there, if curiosity or fate leads you to that cursed place, remember this: when you hear the hum, when you feel the thump, it's already too late. The shadows have you, and like my crew, like my friends, you'll simply disappear. As for me, I'm still here, still waiting. Every day I expect to vanish, to join my crew in whatever dark place took them. And every day that I don't, the dread grows stronger. Because I know it's not a matter of if, but when. The shadows are patient, and sooner or later, they always come back for what belongs to them. So if you're listening to this, consider it a warning and a goodbye, because I can hear the humming now, growing louder with each passing moment. The shadows are lengthening, reaching for me, and I know deep in my bones that this time they won't leave without me. The Watchers in the Woods. Camp Evergreen was about as remote as logging camps get. Nestled deep in the old-growth forests of the Pacific Northwest, it was a small clearing surrounded by towering pines and firs, so dense you could barely see 10 feet into them. Our crew of 20 men was there for a 6-month job, cutting timber in an area that had never been logged before. The first few weeks were uneventful. We fell into a routine. At dawn, work till dusk, then gather around the campfire for dinner and drinks. The work was hard, but the pay was good, and spirits were high. It was Jake who saw it first. He came running into camp one evening, pale and shaking. Said he'd seen something watching him from the trees. A dark figure, taller than a man, with glowing eyes. We all laughed it off. Jake had always been jumpy, and the forest can play tricks on your eyes when the shadows get long. But then others started seeing it too. Always at the edge of our clearing, always just as the sun was setting. A tall, dark shape, almost blending in with the trees. Some swore they saw eyes, others said it had no face at all. But everyone agreed on one thing: it was watching us. I dismissed it all at first, swore it was just shadows and overactive imaginations. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. I started glancing over my shoulder more often while working. Started avoiding the edge of our clearing as night fell. About a month in, things escalated. We began finding strange markings on the trees at the edge of our work areas. Deep gouges in the bark, too high up and too wide apart to be from any animal we knew. And they always appeared overnight, in areas we'd cleared the day before. The men were getting spooked. Some wanted to call off the job and leave. But our foreman, Mike, wouldn't hear of it. We had a contract to fulfill, and he wasn't about to let some forest boogeyman scare us off. That's when the whispers started. At night, on the edge of hearing. Like someone or something was just beyond the firelight, murmuring in a language none of us recognized. We started sleeping in shifts, always keeping someone on watch. I was on watch the night it all went to hell. It was about 2 a.m., the camp silent except for the crackling of our dying fire. That's when I heard it. A twig snapping in the darkness, just beyond the light of our floodlamps. I stood up, peering into the gloom, my heart pounding. For a moment, nothing. Then I saw them. Eyes. Dozens of pairs of eyes, glowing an eerie green in the darkness. They were scattered among the trees, some low to the ground, others impossibly high up, and they were all focused on our camp. I shouted, waking everyone up. In the chaos that followed as men scrambled for weapons and flashlights, the eyes vanished. But we all knew what we'd seen. There was no more denying it. Something was out there, and it was watching us. The next day, half the crew left. Can't say I blamed them. Those of us who stayed were jumpy, constantly looking over our shoulders. We worked in tight groups, never letting anyone go off alone. As dusk approached, the feeling of being watched intensified. The forest seemed to press in around us, shadows growing darker and more menacing. That's when we heard the scream. It came from the direction Jake had gone to relieve himself. We all ran towards the sound, chainsaws and axes in hand. We found Jake's hard hat on the ground, a few feet into the tree line. Of Jake himself, there was no sign. The search lasted all night. We combed every inch of the surrounding forest, but it was like Jake had simply vanished into thin air. No tracks, no blood, no sign of a struggle. Just empty, silent woods. The police came the next day. They searched too, brought in dogs and a helicopter. Found nothing. They told us Jake had probably gotten lost, wandered off. But we knew better. We'd all seen the eyes, felt the watchful presence in the woods. Whatever had taken Jake wasn't human. Most of the remaining crew left after that. In the end, it was just me, Mike, and 3 others who stayed. We were determined to finish the job, to not let whatever was out there win. For a few days, things were quiet. No sightings, no whispers. We started to think maybe it was over. We were wrong. It was our last night at camp. We'd finished the job, were set to leave in the morning. We were celebrating around the campfire when the floodlights went out. In the sudden darkness, we heard it. Movement in the woods, all around us, getting closer. We huddled together, flashlights darting wildly, and then we saw them. Dark shapes moving between the trees, tall, impossibly thin, with long limbs that seemed to bend in unnatural ways. And those eyes, glowing green, filled with an intelligence that was unmistakably alien. They came at us from all sides. I saw Mike go down, dragged into the darkness by something I couldn't quite see. The others scattered. Their screams cut short as they vanished into the woods. I ran harder than I've ever run in my life. I could hear them behind me, moving through the trees with inhuman speed. Branches whipped at my face, roots seemed to rise up to trip me. But I kept going. I don't know how long I ran. Hours, maybe. My lungs were burning, my legs ready to give out. But the fear kept me going. Fear of what was behind me. Fear of those eyes in the darkness. When I finally broke through the tree line onto the main road, I collapsed. A passing trucker found me there in the morning, babbling about shadows and eyes in the woods. The authorities searched the camp, of course. Found it deserted. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just empty tents and abandoned equipment. They found no trace of Mike or the others. It was like they'd never existed. The official report cited animal attacks and getting lost in the woods as the probable cause. They said my story of living shadows and glowing eyes was a result of exhaustion and trauma. Maybe they're right. God knows I've spent countless sleepless nights wondering if I imagined it all. But then I'll catch a glimpse of something moving just at the edge of my vision. Or I'll wake up in a cold sweat, certain I've heard those whispers again. And I know, deep in my bones, that it wasn't a dream. What we saw in those woods was real. I don't go near forests anymore. Can't even look at trees without feeling that old panic rising up. Because I know they're still out there, watching, waiting, and I can't shake the feeling that one day they'll come for me too. So if you're ever in the deep woods and you feel eyes on you, if you hear whispers in a language you don't understand, run. Run as fast and as far as you can, and pray that you're faster than what's chasing you. Because in the darkest parts of the forest, where the shadows grow deep and the trees grow tall, there are things that watch and wait, things that hunger, and once they've seen you, they never forget. As for me, I'm still here, still waiting. Every day, I expect to look out my window and see those glowing eyes staring back at me. And every day that I don't, the dread grows stronger. Because I know it's not a matter of if, but when. The shadows are patient, and sooner or later they always come for what they've marked as their own. The whispers in the woods. I've been a logger for over 2 decades, and I thought I'd seen it all. The isolation, the dangers of the job, the eerie silence of the deep forest, none of it fazed me anymore. Or so I believed. What happened at Camp Whispering Pines last winter, it changed everything. Even now, months later, I struggle to make sense of it. But I need to tell this story. Maybe someone out there can help me understand, or maybe I just need to convince myself I'm not going crazy. My name's Jack. I've always been a loner, which is why logging suited me so well. Just me, my chainsaw, and endless acres of timber. When I got the call about a job at Whispering Pines, I didn't think twice. The pay was good and the location, well, it doesn't get more remote than that. The camp was nestled deep in the heart of the Cascade Mountains, so far off the grid that even GPS struggled to find it. A cluster of weathered cabins surrounded by towering pines and firs, accessible only by a single dirt road that twisted treacherously through the mountains. In the winter, when the snows came, that road became impassable. We'd be cut off from the world for months at a time. I arrived in late October, just as the first chill of winter was settling in. The camp was smaller than I expected. Just me and 4 other loggers, plus a cook and the foreman. The others were friendly enough, but I kept to myself, as usual. I was there to work, not make friends. The first few weeks passed uneventfully. Wake up before dawn, head into the forest, cut timber until dusk, then back to camp for a hot meal and some shut-eye. Rinse and repeat. But as November wore on and the days grew shorter, I started to notice things. It was subtle at first. Just a feeling of unease that I couldn't shake. Like someone was watching me. I'd be out in the forest, chainsaw roaring, when suddenly the hairs on the back of my neck would stand up. I'd whip around, half expecting to see someone, or something, standing there. But there was never anything. Just endless trees and shadows. I tried to shake it off. Told myself it was just the isolation getting to me. But the feeling grew stronger with each passing day. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye, dark shapes darting between trees. And at night, I'd wake up in a cold sweat, certain I'd heard whispers just outside my cabin. The other loggers must have felt it too, though none of us talked about it. I noticed them getting jumpy, arguing over little things. One guy, Mike, he just up and left one day. Didn't even pack his things. Just got in his truck and tore out of there like the devil himself was chasing him. Then came the day I found the cabin. It was early December, and I was marking trees in a part of the forest we hadn't touched yet. The snow was falling heavily, muffling all sound. That's when I saw it, a dark shape through the swirling white. As I got closer, I realized it was a cabin. Old, abandoned. It looked like it had been there for decades, maybe longer. But it was the symbols that made my blood run cold, carved into every inch of the walls, inside and out. Spirals, crosses, eyes, symbols I'd never seen before. They seemed to shift and move when I wasn't looking directly at them, like they were alive somehow. I should have left, should have run back to camp and never looked back. But curiosity got the better of me. I stepped inside. The air was thick, oppressive. It felt like walking into a tomb. Dust coated everything, but there were no cobwebs, no signs of animals. It was as if nothing had lived here for a very long time. And there, in the center of the floor, was a trapdoor. I still don't know what possessed me to open it. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was something else. The moment that trapdoor creaked open, everything changed. A gust of fetid air hit me, carrying whispers in a language I couldn't understand. And I knew with absolute certainty that I'd woken something up. Something old, something hungry. I ran faster than I ever have in my life. But I could feel it behind me, chasing me, hunting me. The forest seemed to come alive around me, branches reaching out to snag my clothes, roots rising up to trip me. And all the while, those whispers grew louder, more insistent. I made it back to camp, but it didn't matter. Whatever I'd unleashed, it followed. That night, as we huddled in the mess hall, trying to make sense of what was happening, we heard it. A low, rhythmic chanting coming from the forest. It rose and fell like waves, growing louder with each passing minute. We tried to leave, but our trucks wouldn't start. The radio was dead. We were trapped. That's when people started disappearing. It was subtle at first. Someone would go to the bathroom and not come back. We'd search for them, but it was like they'd vanished into thin air. No tracks in the snow, no signs of struggle. Just gone. The foreman was next. We woke up one morning to find his cabin empty, the door wide open. But the snow outside was undisturbed. It was as if he'd simply ceased to exist. We grew paranoid, suspicious of each other. No one wanted to be alone, but we also couldn't trust anyone. The whispers were constant now, day and night. Sometimes they sounded like they were right next to me. Other times like they were coming from inside my own head. I started seeing things, shadows that moved against the wind, eyes gleaming in the darkness, and always those symbols. They appeared everywhere, carved into trees, drawn in the snow, even scratched into the frost on our windows. One by one, the others vanished. I don't know if they were taken or if they fled into the forest. All I know is that eventually, I was alone. The last night at camp is a blur. I remember barricading myself in my cabin, huddled under a blanket as the chanting outside reached a fever pitch. The walls seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. Those symbols, they were everywhere, glowing with an eerie light. I must have passed out at some point. When I came to, it was dawn. The forest was silent. No whispers, no chanting, just the soft crunch of snow falling outside. I don't remember much of my escape from Whispering Pines. I know I ran for what felt like days, stumbling through the snow-covered forest. Eventually, I reached a highway and flagged down a passing truck. The authorities searched the camp, of course, but they found nothing. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just empty cabins and a lot of unanswered questions. They chalked it up to a group of loggers abandoning their post, maybe due to harsh conditions or some kind of dispute. But I know the truth. I know what's out there, hiding in those woods. It's been months now, and I've tried to move on. I left logging behind, took a job in the city, but I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear those whispers again. And in my dreams, I see those symbols pulsing and writhing like living things. I know it's out there, waiting, watching, and I fear that one day it will find me again. So let this be a warning. If you ever find yourself in those woods and you come across an old cabin covered in strange symbols, run, and don't look back. Because some things are better left undisturbed, and some horrors, they never stop hunting you. You know, I've never told anyone this part before, but there's something else, something I've been too scared to admit, even to myself. Sometimes when I look in the mirror, I see them. Those symbols, just for a split second, etched into my skin like ancient scars. And in those moments, I hear the whispers again, clearer than ever. They're calling me back. Part of me wants to ignore it, to pretend it's all in my head. But deep down, I know, whatever I awakened in those woods, it's not finished with me. And I'm starting to think, maybe I'm not finished with it either. There's a pull, a longing I can't explain. Like a piece of me was left behind in that forest, and it's calling me home. I've bought a map of the area. I've been studying it, tracing the route back to Whispering Pines. I tell myself it's just to make sure I never accidentally end up there again. But that's a lie. I'm going back. I don't know when, and I don't know what I'll find. But I know I have to. Whatever's waiting for me in those woods, whatever I've become a part of, it's not finished, and neither am I. So if you're listening to this and I don't come back, well, now you know why. And if you ever find yourself driving through the Cascades and you see a dirt road that's not on any map, do yourself a favor, keep driving. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Some calls are better left unanswered. But me, I don't have that choice anymore. The forest is calling, and I have to answer.
Thanks for joining us in the shadows tonight. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories every week. Have you got a story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We love hearing from you. And remember, the darkness holds many secrets. Are you brave enough to uncover them? Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked. Sweet nightmares.